Okay, I think we'll get started. Some folks might trickle in yet, but I want to keep us on time as much as possible. So welcome to this session on homegrown innovations. My name is Emily Rickaby. I'm with Ethisphere. I'm the Global Resources Manager for Bella. And what I'd like to do is really have this be as much a conversation as we can manage. So we'll kick things off here with some introductions, laying the groundwork for what these folks have to share, and then we really invite you to ask questions or maybe contribute some of your own ideas as well. Okay. So, yesterday one of the panels in the general session was all on innovation with a big I, right? Using big data, data analytics to help do some risk management. But this is all about things that we can do that are equally effective, but they don't have to be big or expensive or sometimes flashy. They're things we can do right internally in our own organization. So let me introduce our panel and then we will jump right in. To my right is Mara Davis, Vice President, Ethics and Compliance at the Estée Lauder Companies. And then my left, you're right. Going further on my left is Ling Ling Ni. She's the incoming General Counsel and VP of Ethics and Compliance for Georgia Tech, and very recently the former Chief Compliance Officer and Assistant General Counsel for Panasonic. And to her left is Callie Pappas, the Vice President and Chief Compliance Officer and Deputy General Counsel of Schnitzer Steel. So as we get the conversation started, I think we'll just go down the line here, and if each of our panelists could just talk a little bit about the processes you use to develop tools and resources to further your programs. And as you do so, if you can give us an idea of some of the internal resources you have at your disposal to do that.
So good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all. So I joined the Estée Lauder Companies about 3 months ago. And prior to joining Estée Lauder, I was the Chief Compliance Officer at Univision Communications, which is the leading media company serving Hispanic America. Now, these companies are very different, both in terms of culture and approach and legacy and their mission, of course. And so what I think is really important, starting from scratch at Estée and thinking about how we're going to build some homegrown innovations, is just learning as much about the company's culture and legacy as possible, really understanding our mission and how that mission is operationalized, as well as really sort of what drives people. And at Estée Lauder, the company's mission is really focused around a high-touch approach. It's really about bringing the best to everyone we touch. If you think about our industry and our brands and whatnot, and just even visiting a makeup counter and what that experience is like, it's very much focused on high touch. So it's going to be very important to me to bring that and incorporate that into our company's compliance program resources. By contrast, at Univision, the culture was very different. I mean, of course, it's a very different industry. It's media. And our employees at Univision were very much focused on the company's mission, which was informing, entertaining, and empowering Hispanic America. And my stakeholders at Univision were bilingual and bicultural and very visual. And so the assets that I developed at Univision that were focused around homegrown approach were very much, had to very much resonate with those colleagues. So the Estée Lauder Code of Conduct, which I'm working on right now, will be very reflective of a luxury prestige beauty brand, whereas the Univision Code was really reflective of, the content that the company created.
Thank you.
So I'm going to be looking at my phone. I'm just apologizing. I'm not on Facebook or anything. I'm just trying to be paperless, and so I have all my notes here on my phone. But I did want to quickly introduce Kristen, who's also from Panasonic, and she'll be sort of chiming in as well. And the comments I have today are really about my experience working as a Chief Compliance Officer at Panasonic, because I haven't started my new job. I'm unemployed right now. I'm starting my new job on Monday, so I can't really speak to sort of the processes there with their compliance program. But for Panasonic, similarly to what Mara has, the culture and the workforce is extremely diverse. There's a very large population of Japanese employees, American employees, European employees. In addition to that, it's a very diverse in the sense the departments are very diverse. You have lots of engineers and sales folks and accounting and IT people, all who sort of think differently and process information differently. So you have to make sure you're addressing those variations as well. So we don't have, a one-size-fits-all approach to developing tools. We try to come up with at least, a couple options for training, for example. You have an option, you have a choice in what type of training you want to take, because some people are more visual, other people like to just read. It depends, and so we try to be very sensitive to that. And I think when you work for a global company, that's a really key thing you have to think about when you're developing any sort of tool. One example I can give is our hotline was recently renamed to EARS, which stands for Ethical Action Real Solutions, to make it a little bit more, I guess, relatable to employees. And something we didn't account for was that our employees in Europe, particularly in Germany, found it really offensive because of their sort of totalitarian history, that ears and the logo was an ear, like people were listening to them and spying on them, so that's something we didn't anticipate. But those are the challenges, as an example, that you have to work through when you're developing tools.
So I wrote down ears and then I crossed out ears. Hi, I'm Callie Pappas. And how many people out there are in manufacturing companies? Anybody out here okay, so about as far away from the luxury makeup counter, I think, as you can get. My company, I don't know how many of you were at yesterday's first plenary session with the CEO, but our CEO spoke, and she talked a little bit about our company, and we're a 113-year-old company engaged in metals recycling. And I've actually been there for 13 years, so I'm not in the transition like my two colleagues are. Apparently I'm stuck. But in any event, we operate, steel is the most recycled commodity in the world, and we operate scrap yards that if it didn't come to our scrap yard, it would end up on someone's lawn or in a landfill. But they're not particularly pretty. And, Tamara was saying yesterday, we have the not in my backyard thing. But as a result, we have a workforce that, over half of our workforce does not have email accounts. We have a significant workforce that can't read, frankly. So some of our challenges are very different from, say, a high-tech company with a population of engineers. Now, we also have, financial, accounting people, IT people. So we really have to develop programs that will speak to everybody in the company. And as a result, we have to segment them. But in terms of our resources, it's tight. I mean, we don't have a lot of people or a lot of resources. And I rely on my compliance staff, but I also rely on people in our internal audit, security, and HR in particular. And as we get a little bit more into the interactive discussion, I can give you some examples of what we do. But I think the key is you've heard three of us in very different types of companies, and Ling Ling's now going to go to a university setting. So you really need to look at your compliance program based on the needs of your organization. I was just in the session there hearing about AI and all that. We don't have that. So, that approach doesn't really work for us. We're a little bit more old school, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work and it can't be effective.
Excellent. So let's jump into some examples. So maybe going back down the line and just pulling an example or two, talking about the development process for that, who was involved, if it was just your C&E staff, if you had other internal resources, and then how it was received.
Sure. So I'll give two examples. One from Univision, so a completed example from Univision, and I'm right now in the process of standing up our new code of conduct, our revised code of conduct at the Estée Lauder companies. So at Univision, creativity was really critical because, again, I'm working with a bunch of very creative millennial dominant population. So I had a working group outside of the compliance department that consisted of colleagues from corporate communications, corporate marketing. There was, depending upon the project, oftentimes an executive producer or a writer that was collaborating with us, and colleagues from IT who could help us launch and scale things in a digital manner. And so what I would tell my colleagues from corporate communications and corporate marketing in particular is come to me with your most creative ideas. And then we would think about, how those creative ideas could be realized and how well they would resonate across the organization. And so we were able to do some we were able to realize some creative assets that really generated quite a bit of word of mouth throughout the organization. And so you take a population that really wasn't focused on compliance to suddenly getting them to really talk about compliance. And so maybe a few quick examples. We moved away from the off-the-shelf training modules, and we started to do a lot of development in-house. And so we would leverage our on-air talent for those types of modules, and they were all short modules, or we would leverage subject matter expertise within the company, depending upon the issue. So for example, when we talked about social media, we worked with a leading telenovela actor, we worked with one of our leading sports anchors, things like that. And one of our executive producers was able to create like a 5-minute video that was really, really interesting and sort of had a wow factor and got people to think about social media. We also, around our whistleblowing channels, which we branded the Univision Listens channels, we launched some very visually engaging desk drops that were very colorful. They were produced in 6 different color schemes, and they were so attractive that people just kept them on their desk and sort of put them up on their on their walls of their office because they just looked really, really nice. And so that was sort of a constant reminder to colleagues throughout the company about the resources that they had available to ask questions and raise concerns. Now at the Estée Lauder companies, again, I'm trying to work with colleagues across the company to develop assets that will really resonate in a culture of high-touch luxury prestige beauty. And so we're working on our code of conduct right now, and I'm really excited about it because I think it's going to have a really beautiful look and feel that will generate a sense of pride. And so it will have, really pretty pictures that sort of reflect our products and our company's legacy. Ling Ling?
Well, I think when you talk about sort of homegrown innovation or homegrown, resources, you really have to think about hiring and, your approach to hiring. And, I won't hire someone who only has hardcore compliance skills. I think you're sort of leaving a lot on the table if you do that. I look for people who have multiple skills. A background in graphic design is extraordinarily helpful. And Kristen here, I was so lucky to have her at Panasonic, immensely talented on the creative side, very adept with tools. So I don't like to spend money on creative work. I like to develop that in-house. So when you're staffing your group, think about multiple talents and what you can leverage. And if you're working, in a compliance group and you want to make sure you're sort of elevated and continue to grow, develop some other talents so you can add value in different ways from just your hardcore compliance skills. But one example of a tool that was sort of developed in-house was our code of conduct companion guide. So in Panasonic, the actual code of conduct comes from Japan, and it's like the Bible. You can't touch it. You can't like change anything about it, even if it doesn't really resonate with other regions of the world because it's too sort of Japanese-centric. So literally changing one sentence was a 6-month process of negotiation. So we looked at it, and it was, very antiquated, and we're benchmarking with other companies who have beautiful illustrations, modern, has pictures in it. We wanted something like that, but we knew we couldn't change the original document. So we came up with a companion guide, almost like a supplement to our code of conduct that was a relatable, step-by-step sort of instructional booklet of how to incorporate the values into your daily duties. And that was totally developed in-house through Kristen, using certain software tools that we purchased for very low cost in comparison to hiring out this type of work. And she developed it herself. We also came up with a manager's guide, and printed it in-house with our, communications and marketing team, and also created a QR code so you can just scan that and have it on your phone rather than carrying it around in hard copy. But finding someone with that ability to do graphic design and illustrations and putting together sort of resources like that is extraordinarily helpful. I brought some examples. We did a lot of, we found that stickers were really popular. So we developed a lot of stickers for our compliance and ethics program, and these look really great. These are like professional quality stickers that we completely did, in-house. You can buy, this sticker paper and print out, whatever design you come up with in the software. And, in terms of cost, like how much is that suite of software you use to design all these things? A year? Is it a yearly cost? So that's much, much cheaper than, she said it was.
$700 to $1,000. The software tools that I use were the Adobe Suite, but those are pretty steep for a lot of people if they don't have that experience to start with. There's much cheaper tools out there for people who are less experienced in graphic design that are in the $100, $200 range.
Yeah.
The Creative Cloud? Yep.
Yeah, so it's something to think about adding as a tool because it kind of pays off in spades and saving money and not having to hire other people to do this work for you. Yeah.
So it's very hard enough to have people read the code of conduct and the policies. How do you get people to read the companion guides and other stuff and the leadership guides?
Yeah, I mean, it's also about the content. If you can include pictures of your actual employees, they'll be very excited to see themselves in the particular, document. People want to see their friends in that as well. You used to use really sort of basic language. You don't want it to be sort of legalese. Make it very, very readable and colorful. You just have to make it attractive and do a big launch around it. Don't just sort of silently roll it out. We had a table down in the cafeteria where we did a big launch party for our new supplement to the Code of Conduct. Sounds so nerdy, but that was how to get people to pay attention. And we had snacks and, those types of things. Those are easy and cheap to do, but you can generate a lot of value in people having a real interest in what you're doing. And then once you launch something else, they're going to be like, oh, what is that? I'm interested in it now that I've been kind of pulled in by the first one.
Yeah, and I can add something. I mean, as an example to come up with that guide, we looked at the world's most ethical companies and what they did. Because Code of Conducts are public, so we looked at what everyone else was doing out there, sort of benchmarked and tried to see what ideas we could use from that and recreate what our company's values. And so, we stole ideas, essentially. And what was effective for other people, we tried to reuse in our work.
Yeah.
And the reading level of the material is really important. There's a built-in tool in Microsoft Word that you can use that will tell you the reading level of the document that you have. And we aimed for as low as we could possibly get it. And especially in areas we saw were pretty critical. So we'll take extra time in those to get it lower.
And there were also a lot of infographics incorporated into our companion guide. So we had like an ethical decision roadmap. So rather than saying, here's how to make an ethical decision in an outline, A, B, C, D, E, we actually drew or you created this image of a car sort of driving through the mountains at different road stops. There'll be different sort of touch points where you have to stop and think about certain things. And those type of visual learning aids were really popular.
A couple more questions in the back here.
I was just curious about the stickers. What did you do with them? How did you hand them out? How were those distributed among?
So we did a couple things with the stickers. The first version of our sticker activity, it was called, what was it called now? I think it was, it's amazing when you leave a job, like all the knowledge just disappears out of your brain and you just completely forget about it. So we did, so for Compliance Month, for example, we did a sticker campaign where we said, if you stop by our office and pick up some stickers, that's great, and we're going to randomly come by every week with a bag of snacks, like 50-cent, $1 snacks that you got from the grocery store. And if you're wearing your sticker, you get to have a snack. And people were obsessed. They went nuts. They were put stickers all over their body, so they could get as many snacks as they could. It was very, very. You have what?
Stick them on the computer.
Yeah, people put them on their computers.
I support compliance. It's all that, it's not a really fantastic or exciting sticker, but people are really happy to plaster all over the
Yeah,
place.
you have to give people a reason to want to do it, and food and free food and candy is always a good one. Another way we use the stickers was just for branding a lot of the stuff that we would hand out. When we would hand out, various things like snacks or like promotional items, we make sure we branded it properly. We put stickers on them. So for these stickers, they went on like chocolate, and it says "Compliance is sweet." Compliance has 0 calories, things like that, just to catch people's attention. So there's very, very, different ways that you can use it. You have to be really creative.
Go ahead.
Question regarding both the companion diet and stickers. First, were those for the global population? And if so, how did you manage the translation of those documents while
Yeah, so, whatever region we're operating in, the workforce is going to be global because we have factories all over the world. So we focus on just a couple languages when we talk about translations, Japanese and Spanish. And we don't, unfortunately, have people with proficient enough experience in those languages to do the translations in-house, so we do use a translation company. But it's a few $100s to do those translations, and it's not difficult to then, apply them to the original sort of resource you made and print copies in different languages.
And what I was going to say, we did a lot similar. We also did our code of conduct in-house, and we did something called a code at a glance, which is just one page that is like just the elements. But where I really like the stickers. I'm taking that back, but the message on the code really differs depending on the population we're talking to. If I'm out in the yard, they don't need a lot of antitrust training. There's not a lot of opportunities to restrict trades and fix prices and all this. What we need to worry about is safety, making sure they're following the safety protocol, that, they're not harassing, that they're not stealing. So that's the message, and we do manager talking points that we accompany, periodically, send something, hey, in your staff meetings, here's something that happened out of our, here's a real situation without names that happened, here are some talking points, and can you just have this discussion to try to keep it fresh. The other thing is food and swag are phenomenal. What we do is we partner with our sustainability group, because in our company, Earth Day is every day, because we're a recycling company. So we have a big celebration on Earth Day, and we make it a community volunteer event. We get metal drives. We take things that we normally wouldn't take to help get them off the street. We do education. We partner with local elementary schools and explain recycling and do all these kind of things. And we use that at the same time to celebrate our world's most ethical, because to do just a celebration of the world's most ethical, so we do it together, and that saves budget. So, for instance, we do T-shirts that everybody gets that says Earth Day is every day, and we put them in a bag like the one that Ethisphere handed out with our World's Most Ethical Award, and we talk about it, and everybody gets, some pizza and T-shirts, and that's been super powerful. And the other thing that's very cheap is getting out on the road. And it really is. Travel is always an expense that everybody's looking to cut. But I'll tell you, spending 2 hours at one of our pick-and-pull auto dismantling stores does more for the compliance program than all the trainings and all the posters and all the stuff. Just being in there listening and talking to them. So these are some real, ways. The food, the stickers, in-house graphics. We do posters occasionally. Just stuff like that, just to keep things front and center. And I think it's been effective.
Yeah, I think you should leverage, your employees. So I have another example. It's all coming back to me now. So I have another example is our ambassador program. And I know that's not a new concept. A lot of people designate certain people in departments or subsidiaries to be compliance ambassadors to kind of spread the word about compliance. But we try to take a page out of the playbook of a lot of sports companies who, as a marketing technique, but also as a cost savings technique, they employ sports ambassadors. They don't pay them anything, but they basically give them free stuff and expect them to wear it and post them on Instagram or post it on Facebook to kind of promote their brand within their influence community. So we did the same thing. We created compliance and ethics ambassadors, a formal program that you would apply to about why you'd be a good ambassador for us. And in exchange, you would get this duffel bag that we purchased, branded with Panasonic Compliance and Ethics Ambassador, with tons of free things. Like, here's like a pop socket that you put on your phone, and it says Panasonic Compliance and Ethics Ambassador. They got, a coffee mug, a notebook, pretty low-cost things. But when you put your company's logo on something, everybody really, really wants it if they're really proud to work at the company. It could be something stupid like, a plastic fork. And if you put Panasonic on it, everybody wants that fork. So we just kind of built upon that. And so many people wanted to apply to be an ambassador. So in exchange for getting all this free stuff, which they could wear, there were T-shirts as well. It was their job to host events locally in their department, host tables, put together, bulletins to send out to their local folks. That's a little bit more. It's received well when it's from someone that you know, rather than from me or from Kristen, who we're corporate. So things like that. It was very, very low cost to do that, and people were really, really excited to participate.
And to just piggyback on what Ling Ling was saying, at Univision, we also had an ambassador program. We called it our Local Compliance Leaders Program, and they were responsible for distributing our program assets locally. I did bring some show and tell if anyone's interested. I'm really excited to have the Estée Lauder code at some point. I don't have it with me yet, but I do have the Univision code. And so by way of example, this is a bilingual code. It's very visual. There are lots of pictures in it. And if you look at it this way, it's English. And then if you flip it the other way, it's Spanish. And throughout, we have photographs about our company and sort of what we do. This is one of our tentpole events that airs on TV. And then I also brought examples of the brochures, again, that we developed in-house, all very, affordable, that advertise our whistleblowing channels. So these are for the 6 color schemes. And if you open up the brochure, you see information about all the resources that we have available for employees in English and in Spanish. And so these are what folks kept on their desk, and they really resonated. So if those are of interest, they're up here. Seth?
Yeah, Mara, you mentioned, you mentioned you have a highly, at Univision, you had a highly millennial population. So one would figure that they'd be more inclined to be mobile, have stuff on electronic. How many of those did you actually print? You said
It's a great question. Yeah, so, yeah, it really, I think we probably printed about 5,000 or 6,000 of these. And you're right, most of the workforce is very mobile, and they're consuming all their content on mobile devices, which is why something like this, something that was printed out, actually resonated, because it was something that was different from sort of the day-to-day. Because it really, in a lot of media companies, what I've seen, and I've worked in the media industry for 10 years, is, we're all now consuming content on our phones, and that's sort of where a lot of the millennial or younger consumers are going. So when they get something like this that's paper, it's very different. Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
We have the millennial smartphone side, but we also have tens of thousands of manufacturing. And so we have to literally approach our strategy looking at both spectrums. So I'm really interested to hear, you talked about, you gave great speaking points for managers about the staff meetings. Did you do anything other than kind of just giving them written points, anything that you kind of handed them? And I bring this up, I ask this because the one creative thing we thought of so far was to print badge tags to hang on people's badges. They talked about the most critical things in the manufacturing world from an ethics compliance standpoint, and then the helpline right there. But that's about as far as I've gotten on creativity. So have y'all done anything else that allows those managers to make those providing of those speaking points easier?
A little bit. We can't do it all the time because we can't keep buying stuff, but we did print little cards that are in English and Spanish that have the hotline number on it. We also, and so one of the set of talking points was to distribute those cards. We also put out posters called Use the Open Door, because we still would rather have people go to their supervisor. So we put talking points in connection with, hey, I just put up this poster. Here's what this means. When we've gotten the world's most, I just approved proof of posters to thank our employees for our 5th consecutive year being a world's most ethical. So that's going to be a set of talking points. But other times we just use current events and we don't have anything, because we also don't want to have, hey, every time there's a compliance talk, I get something. Sometimes we tell them, hey, can you bring in donuts today? So it's, I kind of alternate it. If it's a celebration type thing, like a world's most ethical, bring in donuts too. Put it, it's not that expensive. Put it on your budget and do it. If it's more of, hey, we just had a fraud over here and we need to talk about it, we kind of keep it pretty, pretty plain vanilla. So that's how we do it. But I was going to say on the printing and the mobile, how many of you have union populations too? One of our challenges with the mobile, and we've really been struggling with this, is if you send things out, say, here's something, here's a little video, because we've been doing these little cultural, HR's been doing these little culture vignettes. They're literally 1 minute long little cartoon videos, and they're great. But, you know, you can't have the employees not looking at them off the clock. And so we've had a real kind of figuring out how to balance this 24/7 availability with the 40-hour work week having to punch in the clock. So one of our big challenges is making sure that when we do roll out something, we make sure the managers know this is to be done during the workday on the clock. You need to give everybody, you know, 15 minutes. Doesn't count towards their break, doesn't count towards their lunch. And so these are some of the things that, you know, some of these 21st century, are we in the 21st or 22nd? 21st century, yeah, 13 years. 21st century technologies that don't quite translate to, frankly, early 20th century work rules sometimes. So. And I was going to say, sorry, with the training, and I talked about at the yards, we talk about, you know, certain things. And then I sit down with our sales guys and we focus on antitrust, you know. We focus on anti-corruption. We focus on, you know, the antitrust issue. So I try to target, we have one standard training, but we're doing little modules and trying to target it. So, you know, spend more time talking about fraud and respect and, you know, not putting nudie calendars up in the break room, you know, things like that versus antitrust and international corruption. I mean, when I first got there, they had just rolled out, you know, this code of conduct that sounds like the one that you had, the standard one. And they were doing 20-minute sessions at, say, our auto dismantling stores on dealing with foreign government officials. And it's like, you know, no wonder they're, you know. So we're trying to right-size it. And we're not totally there yet. And I wish we could do so much more. And especially we have a large Spanish-speaking workforce, and we translate a lot, but not nearly as much as we should. And that's one of the things that is one of my goals this year, is to try to do more of that.
So we talked a little bit about numbers. Are people curious about what does that cost and how much did that set you back, right? So talk a little bit about budgeting, the role that budgeting plays in these decisions to do homegrown things versus those things that you might choose and want to do outside, have a third party come in and supply for you.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I always try to be as frugal as possible and where possible use internal resources. That's sort of always where I start, is what can I do internally. When I start to think external, it's really for significant things, like if there's a major investigation where we need to hire the right outside counsel to work with us. So for something, you know, like the videos that we did in-house, whether we use actors or leveraged, you know, non-actor subject matter experts, they were all below $8,000. And that included like special effects and, you know, paying for crews and everything. When it came to resources like this, I mean, again, all of these were designed in-house by our employees. We just had printing costs. And those, you know, it was maybe, you know, for the code, it was probably around $20,000. And for the brochures, I don't remember exactly, but it was, you know, nothing that would sort of raise an eyebrow. It was all very affordable. So it was, you know, I think the homegrown approach at Univision worked really well. And it's definitely something that we're working on and working through at Estée Lauder.
And I also think it's sort of a myth that if you work in a big company, you must have so many dollars at your, you know, disposal. So I worked first at the Treasury Department in their ethics team, where the budget is like $1. You know, I spent my own money, you know, on a lot of the training that we did because I needed it to be successful. Had a lot personally invested into it. So when I got the job at Panasonic, I was thrilled to think, you know, we were going to have this unending budget, just tons of money. And yeah, they had a larger, you know, budget, but it still was limited. I still think we're in the age where we have to kind of justify the existence of our program and all the things that we want to purchase. So there's still sort of limitations that we have to work within. But it's, I think, coming from Treasury, where I had to learn to be very frugal, was helpful. So, I mean, I try to get everything for as cheap as possible. I don't know if vendors love working with me because I'm always like, no, cheaper, too expensive. But one example is I really wanted to bring in like a person who had gone to jail for compliance violations. And there's sort of a circuit of speakers who do that. They're quite costly. The one I was looking at was about, this was 5 years ago, was about $25,000 or $30,000 just to come and speak for like an hour. Too expensive. So I went online. This is really shady, but I went online to this forum. It was like a legal forum. I can't remember what it was, and I just sort of posted like, "I'm looking for someone who's gone to jail for like antitrust, particularly. It could be anti-corruption, but really antitrust issues are what I'm really looking for." And someone wrote back and said, "Actually, I have a friend that you might want to talk to who just kind of recently got out." So I was like, cool. So I got his phone number and we talked. And he lives in Cleveland, Ohio. And he's like, come and meet me at the Holiday Inn at the airport. So I said, okay. So I booked a ticket and I met him at the Holiday Inn lobby. And he was great. His name is, he's very open to doing these things now. His name is Lauren Margolis. He goes by Spanky. He went to prison for antitrust violations. And I talked to him. I said, hey, I really need a speaker to come in to give a real life account of what it's like to go to prison. As someone who's a lawyer, a former lawyer, what is you don't ever grow up thinking you're going to go to prison, but what is that like for you day to day? What's like the night before you go to bed to report to prison the next day? What's your first night like? How has it impacted your life now that you're out? And one thing that he talked about was when he gets pulled over now, because he speeds a lot, like 10 cop cars come because he comes up as a felon, when they run the plates. And so for a speeding ticket, like 10 people show up. When his son went to college in Canada, he couldn't visit him because he was banned because he was a convicted felon. So these are things that I wanted our audience to hear about, because if you engage in antitrust activity and you go to jail, these are the real consequences. So I talked to him about that, and he was like, I'd love to do that. I think it's something I want to teach others as a lesson learned for myself. Hopefully they'll not do these same things too. And he cost, and I think he's charging the same price still because he really does this as a personal thing. It was like $3,500, which is hugely, cheaper than some of the other speakers out there. And he's wonderful. If you want his contact information, I can give it to you. But that's how cheap I am. Like, I will do things like this to get like a good deal. And I remember he was like, that after I met him in the hotel, he was like, let's get in the car and drive around some of the scrap yards, because he was in the steel scrap yard business, and that was how he got in trouble.
Are you
so
kidding?
I got into his car and we like drove around Cleveland to all the industrial parks. He took me behind the building. He's like, this is where I go to look for scrap metal. And I was like, oh, okay, but the things I do for my job. But I got a good deal, and everyone loved the event. Like, you could have heard a pin drop in that room. Everyone was fascinated, just riveted by his story. And I was just so thankful that it was cheap. So,
Oh my God. This is, that's our industry. We run all those little scrap yards.
I'll make the introduction. I'll make the introduction to you. But this is just to show you, like, you would think someone at Panasonic could just afford, that number one sort of bestseller author that went to jail, who's now on the speaking circuit. But we couldn't afford him, so we had to think creatively and think differently, risk our lives a little bit to get a good deal. But there are ways to do this. Yeah.
No, that's boy, how do I follow that? What I just say is we also are very, very frugal, and I think every company is nowadays, and I think you have to be. And I think particularly in a field like compliance, if you aren't cost conscious, you will lose your credibility, and there will be backlash, because we're in a very cyclical business. Times are good, times are bad, and if there have been, the equipment couldn't be replaced, or maybe the raises weren't as high as people would have liked because we're in a market downturn, and they see compliance just spending on all this, that's not going to go over well, and it's actually going to hurt your message. So when you look at the budget, we all have budgetary constraints, but I think there are certain things that you absolutely have to have, and one of the arts to this whole thing is figuring out your need to have regardless, and your nice to haves. And your nice to haves is where you have the levers that you can pull, but not on your need to have. And you need, who saw The Incredibles, the first one? Well, second one too. Do you remember when Dash said, if everybody's special, nobody is? Well, it's the same thing with compliance. If everything's a necessity, if everything's an emergency, then nothing is. So, obviously you look at your risk. This is how I do it. You look at your risk, anything that's, a big compliance risk. In our case, anti-corruption is our number one single risk, so that's where we spend our money. But also promoting ethics. It can't just all be about regulatory compliance. So we make sure that we always fund, say, one good training a year. My travel budget rarely gets cut because, again, I feel that getting out there is super cost effective. But for instance, when we did our training a couple years ago, we were in one of these budget cycles, and we don't have any in-house communication or in-house marketing or in-house graphic art. So if we're going to do that, either someone goes to a class and learns how to do it, or we do have to go out to get some of that expertise and customize it. But what we did is we looked into doing these like professional videos and all this, and they were pretty expensive. So we had this selfie video contest. And we sent it out to the entire population and said, take a video, like with your phone, of what the code of conduct means to you or what ethics means to you. And we left it very open. And we had to encourage, and and we got the best stuff, and we ended up being able to put it, our IT people were able to put it in a montage. And it was much more powerful than some slick, professionally produced thing, because it was all the people talking. And that was a super inexpensive way to do it and make it cost effective.
That's a great point for the videos, and it is fantastic, some of those videos that we've been able to produce, but we didn't have money for that, and we're doing all our core trainings homegrown, our own in-house L&D department, producing them. So what we did was actually just go to Shutterstock and get scenario-based pictures. They do have a sound booth, so we were our own script writers and actually naming the characters and the sequence of pictures, doing background shots, focusing on, like, say, if it's personal information, here's a file, and here's, a sensitive form that they see, what do they do? But actually recording that as kind of an embedded video and then just making the in-house produced mobile deliverable. But we really just don't have the expense to set up a location shoot to do all that.
Exactly, and even pictures. We recruited employees like, hey, can someone take pictures around it, and then we'll credit your pictures. It was also a little bit of a photo contest. But one of the funny stories we did a picture, we were demonstrating an unsafe behavior. So we had one of the guys at our facility stand on a table to clean out some vent, and we were taking pictures of this. And of course, the safety guy walked in during the shoot, and we got cited for a safety violation because which shows you we're very, as Tamara was saying yesterday, safety is very important to us. But I mean, we're a mid-sized company, but we are a public company. I mean, we're not two people. We have, 100 locations, and you hear all these companies, we're all doing this homegrown and innovation, and you do what you can, and I think the employees really appreciate that extra effort. And I think a production like what you did would resonate so much better than if you just got, again, I hope none of the vendors from upstairs are down here, but you got like an off-the-shelf kind of with actors and that didn't kind of speak your language, your terminology. That's another thing. Terminology is super important. I previewed some of those things, and it kept talking about clients. And, we don't have clients. We have customers. We have suppliers. We have peddlers, And so some of the terminology, just in the first 30 seconds of the video, people would tune out because it's like, well, this doesn't apply to us.
Sometimes our scenarios, too, what we're doing for the little videos, I think better doing it in-house, as we were saying, having the humility to tell your own stories. So we're using scenarios that are coming up. So saying, if you see this and this, this has occurred, here's an example of how you can handle it.
Yeah.
I think that that's a great approach. And that's sort of how I've developed in-person training, is just taking those real-life examples, obviously anonymizing them and changing some of the facts,
Right.
those become really interesting and engaging stories when you do the instructor-led training. One point I actually want to make about some of these homegrown resources, compliance departments are all cost centers for the most part, but just in terms of, talking to peers in various industries, there's certainly opportunities if you develop something that's really great to even go back and sell it. That was something that I had contemplated in my last role, is to think about, is this something that we can go to market with? And I know some folks in the data who have best practices around data analytics are thinking similarly. So I think it's an opportunity for innovation and to think about, well, is there a way to turn compliance from a cost center to maybe a revenue generator that can even help your budget grow?
Question?
So, Ling Ling, you brought up the point about finding a speaker for hopefully less than you might otherwise spend. I know that I did several things where we did multi-day trainings for compliance champions or liaisons or others in the organization. And we never spent a penny, but we always brought lots of people in from the outside. And the three places I leveraged folks to do that was, one, the audit committee, bringing in either themselves or folks from the companies where they are regularly. They always were happy to bring folks in. Two, our outside vendors, so our law firms, our accounting firms, and the like, were always happy to do that, or at least they did it with a smile, whether they were happy or not. And then three, the folks in this room. So your network of CCOs and other compliance professionals sort of doing a home and home thing where we brought folks from other companies and said, we'll be happy to come to you and do the same for you. And you all of a sudden have a robust perspective brought in, and you haven't spent a penny.
Yeah, I think the outside speaker route is really creative in terms of costs and content. People love to have new faces in front of them. I just thought of another free speaker that I got. So I got the FBI. So as a government official, you can't get paid to do speaking engagements, so you can leverage that. Go to your local FBI division. They actually have a huge commitment right now to community outreach, and they're trying to get out there and educate the public about what they do. So I wanted to do really different anti-corruption training a couple years ago. So I brought in their, the guy who was in charge of the pilot program and working with DOJ on that. And they brought in, and for them it's an opportunity to engage with companies and educate them. And it was a huge turnout because these 7 guys in black suits walked into the lobby. They sat down and talked about how they coordinate with international enforcement authorities on corruption efforts. And it costs $0, so external speakers are a great option.
And we've actually leveraged external government speakers from DHS as well as FBI around the privacy and cybersecurity space. So I think that's an excellent point.
Hey, Lily, going back to the 2 examples you just mentioned, the shady guy who went to jail.
Yeah, Spanky.
Spanky, yeah.
Spanky, I've written it down.
And, the FBI agent. When you're doing those things, you're just doing it for one location in English, right? Or are you...
We broadcast it.
Or are you, either filming or adding subtitles or, like you said, broadcasting, do a live webcast? How are you trying to get the most amount of, the largest audience you can around that?
Yeah, so I'm very strategic about scheduling these particular trainings. I won't treat it like a regular training where I would just schedule it on our own calendar. I'll take advantage of town halls or all hands meetings and reserve time on the schedule for this training to get the most audience. And we also broadcast it to all sites as well, so those who are not physically in the location where the speakers arrived can also participate too. You do have to think about speaker limitations. So the FBI wouldn't allow us to record their event. We could live broadcast it, but we couldn't record it for later viewing. But there's definitely ways to utilize technology to make sure you're getting the largest audience possible, because for Spanky's $3,500, it's great. How can I make the most of that and get everyone to view his talk?
At Univision, we had voiceovers, but it was sort of easy for us because we're in the business of live broadcasts with voiceovers. So, yes.
So I just wanted to echo, because I have the benefit of going to the FBI Compliance Academy through the SEC
Oh, great.
last
That's
year.
great.
And I know that Kristen and Lingman had shared that in Newark we would have the FBI folks come in. In addition to that, they do have amazingly well-done production movies for free that they will let your organizations use. And when I was sitting in there, they're like, okay, you're about to see a 40-minute movie that's based on antitrust and corruption, and it's based on real-life cases. They're public and out there. And I sat there for a minute, and I was like, there's no way in God's green earth, like I have the attention span of a flea, that I'm going to sit here for 40 minutes. But I will tell you, one of the things about the FBI, and it's a bit of a sad commentary on the safety, but because of some of the incidents that have happened in movie theaters throughout the world, they have a partnership, and the production and the quality of the movies were so compelling that I highly encourage you to, Lingman and Christie's point, to really use those assets, because the room was just completely engaged.
And how would
So
you go about getting those?
it's just a matter of similarly how you contacted your FBI office, referencing, there were two movies in particular, the titles are escaping me right now. One was based on, and this is all public information, the Corning Glass issue of years ago about some espionage that was going on internally. And the other one is, I'm forgetting right now. But if you just reach out to them and let them know and reference the Compliance Academy that the SEC does, and for any of you who haven't done it, it's very competitive to get into, but it's completely free. And I think you have to be very cognizant of once the date is released, not to push for them, because I don't even work for them, I think. It's an amazing resource, but the FBI, the only problem I will suggest, if you're going with your eyes wide open, is they would like to have information in that partnership that your companies may be sensitive about not wanting to necessarily go down. So there is a sensitivity and a nuance to that, but I strongly encourage that.
Okay, great.
I did that academy, boy, it's got to be going on 10 years ago now. It was phenomenal.
Amazing, yeah.
I mean, it was great. You went to Quantico, you did all these.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, 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 really cool. Also, in addition to compliance resources, if any of you are, I oversee our security function as well. And you know, they have, and also the local police have tremendous resources on workplace violence and a lot of the fraud prevention types of things. So there really are a lot of, and some of those you don't even have to contact. You can just download them. I mean, so there are a lot of free resources out there and a lot of things that you can leverage. And so, for instance, for our workplace violence training, we do kind of our unique approach, and then we show a stock, you know, FBI film, and then we follow it up. So it's an easy way to just kind of pull things together.
That's right. We only have a few minutes remaining, but I thought I would just run down the panel once more, and if there's a place to start or a particular hot tip that you haven't had an opportunity to share with the audience, go ahead and do that, however you'd like to wrap. And then I would just say, let's keep this conversation going for the time that you're here. Take a look around the room and grab one another and keep sharing the ideas.
Thank you. So to me, what's really important, especially having worked now in senior executive compliance roles for 3 major companies over the last 15 years, is you really have to be in tune with your company's culture and how it sort of how it talks to employees and other stakeholders. So, you know, in joining a new company, read not only public filings to understand the business, but also company-facing reports like social responsibility reports, prior codes, do a gap assessment, look at sort of where you are versus where the world's most ethical companies are, and start to think about your program in that light and think about, you know, what can you leverage internally, what stakeholders can you work with to start developing assets that will resonate.
I guess my last tip is to consider having an intern or an extern as part of your compliance team as a way to kind of augment your staff at little to no cost. And I'm not a proponent of, you know, taking advantage of student labor. You know, I was in that situation years ago when I was in law school. You know, I think if personally, just professionally as a lawyer, I think it's really important to create other opportunities for the incoming generation of lawyers. So that's why I established an externship program. But there's a lot of benefits out of that. The students today are extraordinarily talented, really, really intelligent. And if they're doing an externship with your company, that means they're doing it for credit, so they can't get paid for it under ABA rules. They'll do it for a semester. And I've had so many interns draft policies for me. That's a lot of
time-consuming work that they can do, and they're very happy to do it because they want the experience. And so that's one way to kind of add to your staff without spending a lot of money. We also have a paid internship program. It's for like 8 or 10 weeks. It's $25 an hour. Very competitive. Everybody wants it because they want that experience. But again, you're getting such good quality students to really help you with the work you're doing, and you're also, making a difference in their career as well by giving them exposure to a work environment that they wouldn't necessarily sort of have. So think about adding internships and externship programs to your team. Contact the career services offices at the law schools near you.
And I'd probably end with, the most valuable resource we have is time. And we can't do it all. So everybody just you come to these things, you hear all this stuff, and you're like, oh my God, you can't do it all. And so one of the things I instituted a few years ago is every quarter I get my team together for a half day and we go back to our mission. What is our mission? What are our key risks? What are the key things we want to do? Because what happens is there's an acquisition over here and there's a new project over here and there was an investigation that was particularly hairy over here. And at the end of the quarter, we have a, no blame, like, okay, how much time did we spend on this, and was really this the best use of our time? And you know what? We try to visit this many facilities every quarter, and we only got to one. Okay, how do we correct? And so that keeps us at least from not getting to the total end of the year. And we try to do it as it's going, but this is a formal thing that we never cancel, once a quarter, where we just kind of touch base with our feelings and our vision and our alignment and make sure we're spending our time on the right things. So that's the one piece of advice I'd give.
Excellent. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists.